All right, we are back and we are talking about a topic that I think we're going to be seeing more and more as the election approaches, and that is the growing radicalism among candidates within the Democratic Party. And sure, some people would say that radicalism is demanded in a time like ours, but the truth is that every single era has its cause that some people would say demands radicalism. Now, today isn't going to be a very long stream because it's Friday and I have to get going. And of course, this is a topic that would probably take a fair amount of time to really unwind. But hearing about some of the proposals that are going forward today, it really got me to thinking. And there were other things that I thought about talking about, including the Comey town hall, which I haven't gotten to see. And I don't know if I will watch it because a lot of it is nonsense. But you have these candidates, for example, Elizabeth Warren talking about student loan forgiveness, and what the issue is. Okay, I don't have a problem with people subscribing to ideas that may be, in my opinion, daffy and ridiculous. But Time Magazine, they don't necessarily give her scrutiny and grade her based on the validity of those ideas. They put her in an image like this, a full page image where she's looking defiantly at the horizon as if she's fighting for her principles. When in reality, I think that if you're a mature person, you know that people who are politicians who have been elected over and over again, their idealism is probably sapped by now. They should surely be open to ample criticism, whether it's Elizabeth Warren and I don't know if Warren is the biggest example, but certainly Biden. You could probably make the case that some of these other candidates who have been in office for a while, Klobuchar, um, those people are all basically now creatures of their position. They are essentially conforming to the constraints of power, and I don't think that we should necessarily be pretending that that they're in it for the welfare of humanity. Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about her and the student loan forgiveness. The idea of student loan forgiveness, I think, is becoming more and more popular simply because Americans believe that this will become a crisis that will tank the market. Eventually, a lot of these kids will default on their loans, and then who's going to pick up the tab? Will it be you and I? Well, that's essentially what they're proposing. They're proposing that we that we put the I guess we nip this in the bud and we address this before it really becomes a crisis. I don't really see it that way. I see the real problem being that these politicians are looking for more ways to forgive debt as opposed to teaching ways to avoid going into it. And that's what you see with Elizabeth Warren. That's what you see with people like Bernie and even Andrew Yang to some extent. Although I'll be honest with you, when I see Andrew Yang on TV talking to Tucker Carlson, having a rational discussion about VAT, I do feel at least that you're talking to somebody who has at least a grasp of the topic, who knows a bit about implementing it, somebody who's a man of action as opposed to just a person who will throw out some crazy plan and hope people support it just for the sake of it. That's what I see with Andrew Yang that I don't see with most of these other politicians. Now, this article sort of goes a little bit more into her personality, and of course, you see her. They make the obligatory photo of her drinking iced tea and eating, I guess, is that tomato soup at a Iowa diner or something. That's not reporting. I'm sorry for those of you that don't know what reporting is, but going around and having these heartwarming photos of people interacting with the candidate. that's not what reporting is. And today, they show this stupid um, box of sugar cookies with the word persist on it because of the Mitch McConnell incident where he said that she persisted. That's not reporting. Okay, today Ben Shapiro walked off of an interview with Andrew Neil because Neil gave him some very pointed questions about his beliefs and everything. And I get it that some of Neil's questions were ridiculous, but it showed really that's really something that a conservative politician would typically see. Even though Andrew Neil, to be fair, behaves that way with other guests of his. I've seen him, for example, interview Diane Abbott and basically tear her to shreds, and she's a left-wing politician. But conservative interview subjects typically encounter a lot more of a level of scrutiny, and this is coming from somebody I'm no fan of the Republican Party. I think people like Lindsey Graham, people like Kevin McCarthy, the current Senate House Majority Leader or Minority Leader, and then you have, of course, people like Dick Cheney. I think those are the type of people who ruined conservatism for a whole generation of people because they cared more about supporting their their benefactors, the people who were giving them donations, than they did about actually looking after the welfare of the people who voted them into office. So this paragraph, for example, it says Warren's investment in substance over style is not her only gamble. Over the past few months, she has fired her finance director, eschewed high dollar donors, and hired as much as 10 times as many staffers in early voting states as most of her competitors. While others focus on big money and flashy rallies, she's building a campaign designed to maximize the amount of time she spends in living rooms and community centers talking about what she would do as president. So I saw a poll. I heard that there was a poll out, and this was surprising. So there was, let me see here. This was in April, and believe it or not, so I don't think that Massachusetts is necessarily the biggest battleground in the primary, but Elizabeth Warren, who won her Senate election over there last November by a crushing margin, she came in with a pathetic 14% in the Massachusetts primary polling. Okay, and she's losing to Sanders and Biden, and she's only leading Buttigieg by about 3 points, and that should say something, which is that at a certain point, people decide that they don't trust you. By the way, guys, hit the like button. I hope you trust me enough to push that like button up. Just kidding, I don't care. Hate on me all you want, but yeah, there's a real problem when you talk about these people who are, they virtue signal, and the newspapers and the media accept that virtue signaling and they promote that image, and then eventually people tire of it, and the media starts to realize it and they turn against them. That's what's going on. That's why I titled this, "The Media is Coddling Our First Estate Revolutionary Politicians." Because the fact of the matter is that people like Elizabeth Warren are maybe they came from more modest backgrounds, but they're not modest anymore. They're basically now people of the nobility, people of the higher class. A lot of them started out that way. I think in Warren's case, her family was of a little more humble origins over in Oklahoma. But eventually they'll be cast aside, and that's what's going to happen once the primary begins to whittle down people. These people will be made fun of because ultimately the media loves to laugh at these people, and it's going to be pretty hilarious when Elizabeth Warren drops out of the race. I think it's going to be even funnier when you see some of these other clowns that got in and that had absolutely no chance. For example, this Michael Bennet, who's the senator from Colorado. he's going to probably drop out very early, and people will start to ask, why did you think you could ever win in the race for president? Nobody's ever cared about anything you said. Who else? You have this Eric Swalwell, who continually makes a fool out of himself, and they started spinning yarns that, oh, Trump is a tool of Putin because apparently he's pulled back a bit on some of this intervention in Venezuela. They should be happy about that. We should have a media. We should have Americans that are happy that the president of this country, doesn't matter what president it is willing to negotiate with Russia. Speaking of Massachusetts, we have Memes of Destruction. Welcome back. I believe, actually, Memes once, I think, told me that he voted for Warren. So maybe put in the chat whether you think she even has a chance of winning, because she sure as hell isn't going to get a vote over here in Ohio. that would be pretty. Elizabeth Warren's stooge actually ran for governor here, Richard Cordray, and he got clobbered by a 72-year-old dwarf, and that's our governor now, and he's about to raise the gas tax. So yeah, it sucks. In any case, moving on, Bernie Sanders actually proposed something rather crazy today, unsurprisingly, calling for a cap on credit card interest rates. And I'll read through this as fast as I can. I don't know if I'll get through the whole thing because there is a point to this. It says Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez want to cap interest rates on credit cards and other loans at 15%, but such a plan wouldn't just hurt banks. It could also have major consequences for consumers. Sanders, an independent senator from Vermont, and Ocasio-Cortez, a Democratic representative from New York, plan to introduce legislation they have dubbed the Loan Shark Prevention Act. The bill would establish, among other things, a 15% cap on credit card interest rates and allow other states to create lower limits. Currently, the average credit card interest rate is at a record high of 17.73%, according to data from creditcards.com. In defending the proposal, Sanders described bank issuers' interest rate practices as grotesque and disgusting. You have Wall Street and credit card companies charging people outrageously high interest rates when they are desperate and they need money to survive, Sanders said. He cited past precedent as support for the cap. In 1980, Congress established a 15% cap on credit union interest rates. At one time, interest rate cap limits or usury caps were common across the U.S. So I want to say something about that. Using credit cards is a cultural phenomenon that hasn't been in place for very long. And it started really in the 70s and the 80s when, this was at the time when, of course, the U.S. left the gold standard and all of that. Previously, a lot of people who grew up in the U.S. Would probably remember that it was considered immoral to actually buy things using credit. And it was considered basically, kind of an unchristian way of doing business because you were basically borrowing all the time. And it was so credit cards for a while were essentially looked at as kind of a wealthy thing. If you were very wealthy and you could sustain that type of lifestyle and take out loans and pay them back and leverage debt and things and that was the type of person who would take out credit cards. And eventually, because these companies started to realize that these these tools, credit cards, could be used among the general population, it became easier to get a credit card. At one point, it was not very easy. You could be turned down for a credit card. You still can get turned down for a credit card. I mean, let's not pretend it's a given that you get a credit card. But having an American Express card, when I remember being a kid and having an American Express card, and this was not long ago, was considered a bit like, oh, so where do you use it? You use it at the tennis club? It was seen as something that only people who were very well off would have the Amex card. Okay, or maybe just because that was the advertising. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but using credit was once considered the the domain of the rich, and maybe it should have stayed that way. But I think that what Bernie Sanders is doing is criticizing the progress of human spending patterns. Okay, and I'm not saying that those spending patterns are good, but it used to be considered very unwise to take out large loans and have to pay interest on them. Most people didn't try to do that. Of course, with the credit card revolution, people started to realize, oh, you could buy these things, you could buy stuff by phone, you could do all sorts of crap with these credit cards, and it became very vogue. And that's part of the progress of American consumer culture. Not all of it good. I'm just saying that that's the way it is. And if Bernie Sanders and his ilk think that that's something that can be completely reversed, I'm sorry, but it's the same idea. This is the counterpart. This is the equivalent of what they're trying to do with the Green New Deal. I myself do believe that we have to stop polluting the environment, putting plastics into the ocean, and certainly air quality has to be looked after, conservation of wildlife and wetlands, prevention of algae tide, which, by the way, we have a massive algae problem in Lake Erie up here, which I believe hasn't been addressed yet. So, yes, people do want to look at safeguards for the environment, and those things are, of course, legitimate topics for maybe some government regulation, whether more or less, but in some cases more. But the Green New Deal goes way beyond that. The Green New Deal essentially tries to say that humanity needs to curtail its future and look at basically going into a massive, truncation of its entire existence. To contract back to a smaller mode of living in order to keep the world alive. In fact, it reminds me that Tom Hanks actually had an animated series that he had on Yahoo for a while called Electric City that was kind of envisioning a city like that. And I'll tell you what it looked like. It looked like crap. It looked like you had to, go on not the elliptical, but on like a spinning bike in order to get your light bulbs to turn on, which I guess, would be good for people who need to get in shape. This is what the credit card industry would be like with the Bernie Sanders type of policy. Yeah, credit unions, sure. I get it that a 15% cap makes sense because credit unions are not necessarily meant to be completely dependent on interest and lending out money. But credit unions are more about savings and things like that. It says here, creating a new lower limit on the credit card interest rates could lead to a whole host of changes that may negatively affect consumers. No one benefits from this cap, said Odysseas Papadimitriou. I'm sorry I screwed that Greek name, but the chief executive of personal finance website Wallet Hub. 15% is major as the average interest rate is higher than that for everyone except people with excellent credit. So the cap would lead to a lot more expensive alternatives to a lot of consumers. Here are some of the ways the plan from Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez could backfire if it were to be passed by Congress. We have, let me see here. For some reason, is the chat malfunctioning or something? Because I see that there's more people, but there's not that many chatting. Although Nelson's here. So, yeah, kill them all. What the hell is that about? Is that a French Revolution reference? In any case, it says, when the Durbin Amendment of the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform Consumer Protection Act went into effect in 2010, debit card rewards all but ceased to exist. The amendment capped the interchange fees debit card users could charge to retailers. Banks had used the revenue from those fees to finance the debit rewards programs, so when that well ran dry, the programs were terminated. Okay, so yeah, that looks like So yeah, one of the things that banks do when you pay a bunch of fees is that they are able to use those fees in order to, give some perks to maybe some depositors who have better credit or are doing very well. In any case, that's the same idea that would happen with credit cards. I personally don't really use credit cards. This wouldn't necessarily affect me. I'd probably use my credit card very. I think sometimes when I buy something online, I'll use it. But I don't really buy too many things online, and if they are, they're usually not even that expensive. So this would essentially be pretty bad for people who do a lot of shopping, who go to the mall a lot, and that don't necessarily use their. People who are living paycheck to paycheck will buy on credit sometimes because they don't have the money in their account to use their debit card, for example. There's a number of reasons people would use their credit card. And some people, believe it or not, use their credit card in order to get rewards, in order to get airline miles, in order to get cash back, things like that, which I'm not very savvy about. But this is some basic stuff here. A similar fate could await credit card rewards if interest rates were capped, said Matt Schultz, chief industry analyst at personal finance site comparecards.com. Anything that hits banks' bottom lines hard, as this certainly would, could lead to less lucrative credit card rewards, he said. Banks are already a little queasy about the high cost of the rewards arms race, so taking a big bite out of their interest revenue certainly wouldn't help. Nor is this proposal as unusual as one might think. Until the 1970s and 1980s, most states had usury caps for consumer loans, and some still do for payday loans, according to the National Consumer Law Center. But a 1978 Supreme Court decision allowed banks to charge their home state's interest rate to customers at the national level, which prompted some states, including South Dakota and Delaware, to abandon their limits in order to attract banks to set up shop there. Federal lawmakers subsequently passed deregulatory legislation to loosen lending amid the double-digit inflation in the 1980s. So that's one of the issues that happens. Okay, the more limitations that you put on the market, you end up getting, undesirable results like double-digit inflation. That's what happened, especially. I believe Carter started the inflation, and it continued for some of Reagan's term. I think there was a market crash in 1981. It says it could lead to an increase in the fees charged to card holders. Banks would want to maintain credit card rewards programs if at all possible because they're an easy way to differentiate a credit card and give it an advantage over competitors' offerings. This is also true. What's the difference between a Discover card and an Amex card? And I don't know if they still have Novus, but I remember the Novus card was the coolest looking one. But yeah, when you have those credit cards, they all offer some different perks or different, different like things that, or some of them. It used to be that more of them were kind of limited in their distribution. Discover, for example, wasn't always very common to be accepted, but where it was, you could get some like banging rewards for it. But in any case, there are a number of big changes that could happen if this were to go into effect. Welcome, Larry and Amy and Dave. But I want you guys to pay attention to that. So these are people, Sanders and Warren, that make up what I would call the first estate nowadays. They're the noble people. They're in the Senate. They live lives that most of us could only dream of. And this is Antoine Lavoisier, who he was a noble and he was a chemist at the time of the French Revolution. Yesterday I made a video about the French Revolution. I'm not trying to be, to exaggerate here and go make like a huge ruckus about it. I'm not saying that the French Revolution is literally going to happen, but these are the types of people who became victims of the French Revolution. Lavoisier became one of the leaders of the metric systems, adopting the metric system, putting it together at the beginning of the French Revolution, and eventually, because of the abuses of the French Revolution, he was robbed of all of his property. His laboratory was closed down, and he was guillotined. So I think that we have to bear in mind that these people, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, yeah, maybe they have good intentions in mind. They think that they're going to help America, but the people who will end, you see people like Ocasio-Cortez, they'll be the next generation. When Sanders and Warren die off, okay, you're going to get the real fanatics who are going to put forward their ridiculous ideas. And that's going to be the real problem that some of you might think it's like, a joke here, but Bernie Sanders is a piece of crap, but he'll be nothing compared to the people that come after him. Those are the people that are genuinely angry. They have this fanaticism about them. Now they're vandalizing people's properties. They're going over people's houses, doxing them and everything. They will implement these policies, and once they get resistance, they're going to put it down with an iron boot. So I have to go, but I want you guys to go into the weekend thinking about that. Also, please hit the like button, as always. Share the channel. Share my video from yesterday about the French Revolution. And please also subscribe to me on BitChute at Chef Leopard, and on Minds.com at Chef Leopard, and on Gab at Starscream85. Could be a couple of streams this weekend, but haven't closed on anything else, anything yet. So see you guys later. TGIF.